step up, and let's see if a country arm has any iron in it." That was the first thing I heard him shout, and it was the first lie of the day, though I did not know yet how many would follow it. I was standing at the edge of the Marden Field Fair with my boy's hand sticky in mine, and a paper twist of roasted nuts going cold in my pocket, and I had come up the valley that morning the way half the parish had, on foot, in carts, in our best coats with the creases still in them. Because the fair only comes to Mardenfield once a year, and a man wants his children to remember that it came at all. The showman stood on a low painted stage at the heart of it. He was an enormous man, broad as a barn door, with a waxed black mustache and a striped shirt rolled to the elbow to show forearms like hams, and behind him hung a great iron bell on a frame with a striker, and a tall post painted in numbers, and a mallet leaning ready. "The Hammer of the South," the banner called him, in gold letters that had been touched up so many times the paint stood off the cloth. A man came down the bottom road every harvest selling cure-alls, and never the same wagon twice, but I had never seen anything like this fellow, and neither had Marden. We are a small place. We grow oats and graze the high pasture, and we go to market in the next town twice a year. We are not the sort of people who often meet a man whose whole trade is making us feel small. He was very good at it. I will give him that, the way you give a wolf its teeth. "You, sir," he pointed his mallet straight down the front of the crowd at Tom Aller, who farms the wet ground below the church and has shoulders on him from 40 years of lifting beasts out of the mud. "You look like a man who's done a day's work. 2 pennies too, and ring my bell and you'll carry off this purse." He held up a leather purse and shook it so the coins inside it chimed. "A whole crown in silver. Step up. Or are the men of Marden all show and no shoulder?" The crowd laughed, because we did not yet know to be careful. Tom went red and pushed forward and put down his 2 pennies, and the showman handed him the mallet with a flourish and a wink at the rest of us, and Tom spat on his hands and swung. The striker leapt up the post. It went past the painted numbers 3, 4, 5, and you could feel the whole fair lean forward, and at the top, a hand's breadth below the bell, it stopped, hung, and dropped back. "Ooh," went the showman, all sympathy, and clapped Tom on the back hard enough to stagger him. "So close, so very close. A bigger man might have done it, no offense, friend. Who's next? Who'll show this poor fellow how it's done?" I should have wondered, even then. I had seen Tom Aller throw a full-grain sack onto a high cart one-handed. But the thing about a crowd is that it does your thinking for you, and the crowd had decided that the bell was simply very high and Tom was simply not quite enough. And so one after another, the men of my parish put down their pennies and swung, and one after another the striker climbed and stuck and fell, while the silver purse swung on its nail and the showman's smile never moved. By the time the sun was overhead, he had taken pennies from half the grown men in Marden and a good few of the boys who'd saved all summer, and the silver crown had not changed hands once. He had a way of taking that made you want to try again. "Ah, you almost had the measure of it that time. One more, sir, one more. Your arms only just warmed." And the pennies came out again. A penny is nothing. A penny twice is nothing. A penny twice from every pocket in a poor parish all day into one leather apron, that is a great deal of nothing, and by noon it was a heavy apron. I did not put down a penny, not because I was wise, because I am not a big man and I did not want my boy to see his father's striker stick at the fore. I held back at the rope and I watched, and watching is its own education. That was how I saw the wedge. The showman had a boy of his own, a thin, quick lad of 15 or so in the same striped shirt, who hung about the back of the frame and tidied, he said, between swingers. And once, when a Marden man's swing was truer than the rest and the striker fairly flew, I saw the showman step back as if to give him room, and I saw the boy's hand go to a little iron lever low on the back of the post, half hidden by the painted board, and I saw the striker which had been flying falter at the top as though the air itself had thickened and fall. The crowd groaned. The man who'd swung shook his head at his own arm, and the showman said, "Closer, the closest yet." "One more, friend, your luck's in, and took 2 more pennies. I am not a clever man, but I know a break when I see one. I had seen the same kind of catch on a mill wheel, a thing you press to make a turning thing stop. He had built a fare that could not be won. He had built it on purpose, and dressed it as our own weakness, and he was selling us back our shame a penny at a time. I felt my face go hot. I'm ashamed to say I did nothing. What was I going to do, climb the stage and accuse a man twice my size in front of my neighbors on the word of one glimpse? They'd have laughed at me harder than they laughed at Tom. So I held my boy's hand and I held my tongue, and I hated myself a little, and I told myself it was only pennies. It was not only pennies, but I would not understand that for another hour, and it took a man in a red coat to teach me. The red coat was a king's guard, and he had no more business at Mardenfield Fair than the king himself, and yet there he was. We learned the why of it only later in pieces, the way a small place learns everything. There was a coach standing off at the far edge of the green under the chestnut trees, a plain dark coach with the wheels still dusty from the post road, and it carried some person of the household, a lady of the court. It was said, an old one, going by slow stages to take the waters at the springs above us, the way the gentry do for their health. The court does not announce such things to a parish like ours. All we knew was that the coach had stopped to rest the horses and let its passengers sit a while in the autumn sun, and that 2 of the king's own had come up on horseback as her escort, in their red wool and their tall black bearskins, looking as out of place against our hay carts and our striped tents as a cathedral candle in a cowshed. One of them stayed by the coach, the other walked the fair. He walked it slowly, with his hands clasped behind him, and he did not buy anything, and he did not laugh at anything, and the children trailed after him at a respectful distance the way they'll trail after a tall horse. He was younger than I'd have thought, 30, maybe, with a still, plain face that gave nothing away, and he moved through that loud, bright fair like a man moving through deep water, unhurried, watching everything. I think now that watching is what they are trained to. The whole of his trade, when you boil it down, is to stand where he is put and see what is in front of him and not be moved by it. He had been moved by nothing all morning, and then he came to the bell. He stopped at the back of the crowd where I was, and he watched 3 men swing and fail, and the silver purse swung on its nail, and I watched his eyes. They did not go to the striker, the way everyone else's did. They went to the back of the post. They went. The second time the boy's hand drifted to that low iron lever, exactly where my own eyes had gone, and they stayed there, and something in his still face changed by an amount you could have missed if you weren't already ashamed of the same secret. The showman saw him too. You could not be in the trade that man was in and not keep one eye always on the edges of your crowd, and a red coat and a bearskin are not a thing that hides. For a moment the 2 of them simply looked at each other across the heads of my neighbors, the great loud man on his painted stage and the still man at the rope, and I had the strange feeling of watching 2 animals decide whether there was going to be a fight. The showman decided there was. He decided it because he was clever, and because a clever cheat knows that the most dangerous thing in the world is a quiet man who has seen the trick, and the only cure for a quiet man is to make him loud, or make him small, before the crowd can wonder what he saw. "Well, well, well," the showman boomed, throwing both arms wide, and the whole fair turned to look. "What's this the wind's blown up the valley? A soldier, a real live palace soldier all the way out here among the turnips." He bowed, low and mocking, sweeping his hat. "Your Majesty's most humble fairground welcomes you, sir. Come to ring the bell, have you? Come to show these farmers how a king's man does it." The crowd laughed, glad of a new turn, and 100 faces swung from the showman to the guard and back, hungry. I felt my stomach drop. I knew exactly what the man was doing. He was going to do to the guard what he had done to Tom Aller and all the rest of us, make him try, make him fail at the rigged game, and laugh the danger right out of him in front of the only crowd that mattered. The guard said nothing. He did not move from the rope. "Oh, come now," the showman crooned, climbing down off his stage and wading through the parting crowd toward him, big and grinning and dreadful. "Don't be shy. We've all heard about you fellows. Stand all day like a statue, never blink, never speak. They say you wouldn't move if the place caught fire." He stopped a yard from the guard and looked him up and down, slow, the way you'd price a horse. "I always wondered, is there a man inside the costume at all? Or have they just propped a nice, red post up by the gate to fool the tourists?" A yard away from him, the guard looked back, level and unbothered, and still said nothing. And the not saying was somehow louder than all the showman's shouting. It only made the big man work harder. A cheat is a kind of performer, and the worst thing you can do to a performer is fail to react. So he turned to the crowd instead. That was always his real audience. We were, and he began to play us against the silent man at the rope. Look at him, won't even answer a civil question. He grinned around at us. "You see, friends, that's all they are, Polish and feathers. They put on a brave face for the postcards, but ask one of them to do an honest day's work. Ask him to swing a hammer like a real man, like Tom there, like all you good people, and watch him scurry back to his coach." He swept the leather purse off its nail and dangled it under the guard's nose, the silver chiming. "I'll tell you what. I'll make it easy for the king's pet. Free of charge, no penny on the house, one swing of the hammer of the South. Ring my bell, soldier, and the crown's yours to carry back to the palace. Can't say fairer. Or are you going to stand there like a fence post and let these honest farmers see what their taxes buy?" That landed. I felt it land all around me, a small, ugly stir in the crowd, the stir of people who have been made to feel poor all morning and are glad for once to have somebody above them to pull down. A few men laughed. Somebody called out, "Go on, Redcoat, give it a swing." And somebody else, "Bet he can't." And the showman spread his hands as if to say, you see what your own people think of you. And I understood his whole game then, the deeper one under the pennies. He did not only sell us our shame. He sold us somebody to look down on, so we would not look too hard at him. As long as the crowd was laughing at the soldier, the crowd was not asking why the bell never rang. The guard let all of it wash over him. I was close enough to see that he had not so much as tightened his jaw. His eyes had gone back to the post, to the painted board, to the boy loitering by the lever, to the bell, and they moved over the frame slowly. Once, the way a man reads a page he means to remember. Then they came back to the showman, and he spoke for the first time, and his voice was quiet and even and carried further than all that shouting because every soul on the green had gone still to hear whether the post could talk. "I won't swing your hammer," the guard said. "Ha!" The showman wheeled on the crowd, triumphant. "There it is. What did I?" "I won't swing it," the guard went on in that same level voice, not raising it a hair, "because it can't be won. There is a break on the back of your post. Your boy works it. When a man swings true, he stops the striker before the bell, and you sell him another swing on the lie that he was close." He did not point. He did not raise his hand. He simply said it plainly, the way you'd report the weather. "These people have been paying you all morning to lose a game you fixed before you ever rolled into their valley. That is why I won't swing your hammer. I don't help a man rob the people I was sent to ride past." For one full breath, the fair was silent. Then the showman laughed, but it came a half-second late and a shade too loud, and I was not the only one who heard the difference. "A break! Did you hear that, friends? A magic break. The redcoat can't ring my bell, so it must be witchcraft." He flung an arm up at the frame. "There's nothing back there but wood and iron, same as any hammer game from here to the sea. Come up and look. Come up, all of you, come and find this famous break." He was banking, I think, on the fact that nobody in a crowd ever does come up, that the dare is safe because shame keeps men in their place. He had not reckoned on the guard. "I'd be glad to," the guard said, and he stepped over the rope. I have thought about that step a great deal since. It does not sound like much, a man lifting one boot over a length of cord. But I had watched that soldier all morning move through our fair like a man through deep water, slow and untouched, and the truth is that a king's guard is not supposed to leave his ground. Standing is the whole of what they are. He had a coach to guard and a lady of the household to see safe to the springs, and stepping over that rope to take the part of a parish of strangers against a fairground cheat was not, I think, anything anybody had ordered him to do. It was a thing he chose. He waited in that long quiet look he'd given the frame, and he stepped over the rope, and the crowd went very still, because a thing they'd taken for a statue had just decided to walk. The showman's grin did not change, but his eyes did. He was a man who lived by reading crowds, and he had just felt his crowd shift under him like loose scree on a hillside, and he knew it. "Now hold on," he said, and his voice had dropped the boom. It had gone low and hard and private just for the guard as the soldier came up the front of the stage. "You don't want to do this, friend. This is my pitch. You've no call to come poking about a working man's livelihood on the word of nothing. You make trouble for me here and I'll have the magistrate on you for slander, palace coat or no palace coat. You think a country bench loves a king's man telling them their fare's a cheat. You think they'll thank you." He stepped in close, using all that size of his face a foot above the guards, his shoulders blotting out the sun. It was the oldest trick the big use on the small. Loom and let the looming do the talking. The guard did not step back. He did not square up either, did not put a hand near the rifle slung at his shoulder, did not raise his voice to match. He simply stood, and I saw then that the standing the showman had mocked all morning was not weakness at all but the most solid thing on that green. The big man was a wall of bluster, and bluster is air. The guard was a wall of something that did not move because it had decided not to, and there is no shoving a thing like that. The showman pushed his chest near enough to brush the brass buttons, and the guard let him and looked up at him without a flicker, and the looming simply failed, ran out, like a wave that climbs a sea wall and finds it has nothing left at the top and slides back down again. "You can call the magistrate," the guard said, quietly, only for the two of them, though I was near enough to catch it. "I'll wait with you till he comes. But you and I both know what he'll find on the back of that post, and so do you, and that's why you'd rather threaten me than let me up there. Now stand aside or come up with me. Either one. But you won't loom me off a thing I've already seen." Whatever the showman heard in that, and I think what he heard was a man who genuinely did not care how big he was, it took the air out of him. He stood aside. He had to make it look like contempt, with a sneer and a wave of the hand. "Go on then, satisfy yourself, fool." But he stood aside, and the guard went up onto the stage and around behind the painted post, and the whole fair pressed against the rope to see. "Bring your boy," the guard said. The boy did not want to come. He was a thin, sharp-faced lad, and his eyes went to the showman first, the way a beaten dog's will, and that one glance told me more than I wanted to know about the life of that boy. But the guard's voice was not unkind to him, only firm, and there was nowhere on a stage to hide, and so the lad came around the back, and the guard crouched and looked at the low place on the frame where I had seen the small hand go, and he found it in about as long as it takes to tell. "Here," the guard said, and he did not yank it or wave it like a showman. He just laid two gloved fingers on a short iron arm half buried behind the board and moved it gently, and we all heard the soft, heavy clack of a brake pad coming down against the rail the striker rode. "Swing it now," he said to the nearest farm lad at the rope, the blacksmith's son, a great ox of a boy. "Hard as you like." The smith's boy came up red and eager and took the mallet and brought it down with everything he had, and the striker shot up the post, and at the fore it died, exactly as Tom Allers had died, exactly as every honest swing in Marden had died all day, caught and killed by an iron hand none of us had been meant to see. Then the guard lifted the brake off with 2 fingers. "Again," he said. The smith's boy swung again, no harder than the first, and this time nothing held the striker, and it climbed clean and free past the 4, past the 8, up and up to the very top and rang the bell. The sound of it went out over the whole green, clear and bright, the one true note in a day of lies. I will not forget the noise the crowd made. It was not a cheer. It was lower and uglier than a cheer, a long rolling growl of a sound, the sound a patient, decent people make when they understand all at once that they have been laughed at all day by a man who came to their valley to take their money and call it sport. Tom Aller's face, Tom, who had gone home at noon a little ashamed of his arm, Tom's face, when that bell rang, is a thing I will carry to my own grave. He had thought the failing was in him. They had all thought the failing was in them. And it was not. It had never been. The showman had taken not just their pennies but their measure of themselves, sold it back to them broken, and pocketed the difference, and now the bell was telling them so. The showman moved fast for so big a man. He saw the crowd turning, and he did the only thing left to a cornered cheat. He tried to take the high ground he'd already lost. "Tricks," he bellowed, charging up onto his own stage, putting himself between the guard and the frame. "He's rigged it. He laid that pad himself just now to fool you. He's a king's man. They'll say anything to make a country fair look bad. Who are you going to believe? Your own neighbor's fair, or some palace puppet who's never done a—" "They felt it," the guard said. He did not shout it. He said it across the showman's bellowing, flat and certain, and somehow it cut clean through. Every man here who swung your hammer felt the striker die under his own arm and didn't know why. They thought it was them. Now they know it was you. You can shout tricks until dark. You can't shout that feeling back out of their hands. It was the truest thing said all day, and the crowd knew it, because every man who'd swung that mallet had felt exactly that strange thickening at the top, that sense of an arm that should have been enough and somehow wasn't. The guard hadn't told them anything. He'd only let them understand what their own bodies had been telling them since morning. The showman changed tack. They always do, the men like that. They have a whole drawer of faces and they go through them one by one. The bluster fell off him and the loom came back, and he came down off the stage at the guard slow and heavy, and his voice went to that low private menace again, but loud enough now for the front rows to catch, because he wanted them frightened. "You've cost me a day's takings, soldier," he said. "A week's. You know what a man like me does to a man who costs him that. I've friends up and down this road. I'll know your name and your regiment and your post before the sun's down, and I'll make such a noise about a king's guard who assaulted an honest tradesman and wrecked his stall at a country fair that they'll have your red coat off you by the new year. Is that what your king keeps you for? Brawling at fairs? You want to bet your post against my pitch, boy?" "Because I will. I've nothing to lose and you've everything." He smiled, and it was a real smile, the worst one yet, the smile of a man who had ruined people before this way and enjoyed it. "Walk away. Get back on your horse and ride your old lady to her springs and forget you ever saw a break, and I'll forget your face. That's the deal. That's the only deal." And there it was, the same threat he'd have used on me, on Tom, on any small man. "I am bigger than you and I will say loud lies about you, and the world believes the loud." It was the engine under everything he did. It had worked his whole life. The guard considered him for a moment. Then he did a thing I did not expect. He smiled just a little. The first time all day his still face had moved at all, and it moved into something almost like kindness, which was somehow more frightening to the showman than any glare could have been. "You've made one mistake," the guard said. "You think I'm afraid of losing my post." He shook his head slow. "I'm not here because I love standing still. I'm here because somewhere behind me there is a woman of 80 years who trusted that the king's road would see her safe to the waters, and a parish of people who trusted that a fair come to their green would be honest sport for their children. Trust is the only thing I guard. The bearskin's just the part that shows." He let that sit. "You can have my name and my regiment. I'll write them down for you. But you've made the one threat that has no hold on a man like me, because the thing you're threatening to take is the thing I'd give up gladly before I'd let you keep robbing these people. There's no deal. There was never going to be a deal. Stand where you are." The showman did not stand where he was. He bolted. For a man that size he was quick, and he went sideways off the back of the stage and into the gap between his own tent and the toffee sellers, meaning, I think, to reach the lane where his wagon stood and be gone up the road before any country bench could be raised against him. It was a good plan. It was the plan of a man who had skipped out of a dozen fairs ahead of a dozen angry crowds, and knew exactly how long it takes a slow, rural place to organize itself into doing anything. He had not reckoned again on the guard, but this time it was not the guard at all that stopped him. It was us. Because here is the thing the showman never understood about a place like Marden, for all his cleverness at reading crowds. We are slow, yes. We are easily shamed, and we keep to our place, and we will stand at a rope and let a loud man make us feel small all day. But we are not strangers to one another. Every man on that green had known every other man on it since they were boys together, and a crowd of strangers will let a runner run, but a crowd of neighbors closes like a hand. He came out of the gap between the tents straight into Tom Aller and the smith, and 4 other men who had simply walked round the back without being told to. Because that is what you do when a thief runs at a fair where your own children's pennies are in his apron, and they did not strike him or pull him down. They just stood there, a wall of farmers, shoulder to shoulder in no hurry, and let him understand that the lane was closed. "Easy now," said Tom Aller, who an hour ago had stood ashamed of his arm. "Nobody's going to hurt you. We're just going to wait for the constable, all of us together, and you're going to wait with us." And the showman looked at that line of broad, slow, patient men, and knew the difference between a crowd you can frighten and neighbors you cannot, and the fight went out of him all at once, the way it does, and he sat down heavily on an upturned crate and put his head in his hands. He tried once more, even then, to talk his way back up the hill he'd fallen down. "It's a game," he said, to nobody and everybody, his voice gone wheedling and small. "It's only a fairground game. Every hammer game from here to the sea's got a little. There's no harm in it, it's sport. It's a bit of fun, you all came of your own feet." It was my own boy who answered him, and I have never been prouder of anything in my life, though he was only 7 and did not know he'd said a thing worth keeping. He had been at my hip the whole long day, and he'd watched his father not put down a penny and not say a word, and he'd watched the redcoat ring the bell, and now he looked up at the great fallen man on his crate and said, in the clear, flat way of a child who has not yet learned to be polite about the truth, "But you told everyone it was them that was too weak. You let Tom Aller think it was his arm." The showman had no answer for that. There is no answer for that. A grown man can argue with another grown man about what is sport and what is robbery until the moon comes up, because grown men have learned how to make a wrong thing sound reasonable if it profits them. But a child who has watched the whole of it cuts straight to the one thing under all the words. You made them ashamed of themselves to take their money, and there is nowhere for a cheat to go from there. The crowd heard it too, and a low murmur went through them, half a laugh and half a growl, and a few of the men looked at my boy and then at one another and then at the man on the crate, and I saw the last of the showman's hope of talking his way clear die in his face. He'd built his whole trade on being cleverer with words than country people. He had not counted on a 7-year-old, who simply said what he'd seen. It took the better part of an hour to fetch the parish constable from his dinner 2 miles off, and the magistrate, Squire Holloway, from the same, and the guard waited the whole of it. He could have ridden on. His charge was the coach and the lady, and his fellow had it well in hand, and no one would have blamed a king's man for leaving a fairground squabble to the locals once the cheat was caught. But he had said he would wait with the man until the magistrate came, and he was, I was learning, exactly the kind of man who does the thing he says, and so he stood by the crate in the lengthening shadows with the apron of stolen pennies at his feet, and he did not gloat, and he did not lecture, and he did not so much as look at the broken showman with anything you could call triumph. He just kept the watch. It was, I think, the same thing he did at his gate. A wrong thing was trying to get away, and he had put himself between it and the road, and he meant to stay there until somebody with the lawful right to take it from him arrived. That was all. That was the whole of him. While we waited, the boy crept up beside him. The thin, sharp-faced boy in the striped shirt, who had worked the brake all day at a hard man's word. He came up to the guard's elbow and stood there a while, not knowing how to begin, and at last he said, very low, "Will I go to jail?" The guard looked down at him. "Did you build the brake?" "No, sir, he did, years ago before he had me." "Did you want to work it?" The boy was quiet a long time. "No, sir," he said, "but there wasn't, I haven't got anywhere else." And the guard, who had not bent an inch for the big man's looming or the threats to his post, bent now. He went down on one knee on the dirty board so that his still plain face was level with the boy's, and he said something to him too quiet for the rest of us to hear. And whatever it was, the boy began to cry, not the frightened crying of a child caught out, but the other kind, the kind that comes when somebody has, after a long time, been kind to you in a way you'd stopped expecting. I learned later what the guard had set in motion for that boy, but I will come to that, because it is the part of the day I am gladdest to have seen. Squire Holloway came at last on a fat gray cob, red-faced from being pulled off his pudding, ready to be irritated at all of us. He was the kind of country magistrate who does not love being told his fare is a cheat any more than the showman had predicted, and for the first few minutes it went exactly as the showman had hoped it would. "Now what's all this?" the squire blustered. "What's all this? A king's man stirring up my parish over a hammer game. I've half a mind to." "Sir," said the guard, and he was as level and respectful to the magistrate as he had been immovable to the cheat, "I'll show you the same thing I showed them, and then you may judge it however you see fit. I'd not ask you to take my word over your own eyes." And he did. He had the smith's boy swing once with the brake down, and the squire watched the striker die at the fore. Then he had him swing once with the brake up, and the squire watched the bell ring. Then the guard simply stood back and let the magistrate go up behind the post himself and put his own fat fingers on the iron arm and feel it move, feel the pad come down hard against the rail, and I watched Squire Holloway's whole face change as he understood. He was not a bad man, only a comfortable one, and when he understood that a stranger had come into his parish and built a machine to rob the people he was sworn to keep, the comfort went out of him, and something older and better came into its place. He came down off that stage a magistrate. "How many swung today?" he asked the green. It seemed half of Marden put up a hand. "And how much did each of you pay?" "2 pennies," came the answer, but again, and again, all day 2 and 2 and 2. The squire turned to the showman on his crate. "We'll have your apron," he said, "and your box, and we'll count it on this table here in front of every soul you took it from, and we'll give back what's owed as near as honest men can reckon it, and what can't be reckoned to a face we'll put to the church poor box, since it came from this parish's pockets, and to this parish it'll return." And that is what was done. The constable emptied the leather apron and the strongbox onto the toffee seller's table, a shining heap of coppers and a few silvers, and they counted it in the gold light of the late afternoon while the whole fair stood witness, and they gave Tom Aller back his pennies, and the smith his, and a dozen boys who'd saved all summer got back the savings the man had charmed out of them with his, "One more, son, your arm's only just warmed." It was not a fortune. It was never a fortune. It was a poor parish's small money given back to poor people's hands, and I tell you I have seen rich men's fortunes change owners, with less meaning in it than there was in those coppers going home. The showman was bound over to answer at the assizes for fraud, and his painted frame with its hidden iron hand was named as the evidence of it and taken into the constable's keeping, and the magistrate set it down in his own hand that the hammer of the South was a rigged machine, and its keeper a common cheat, so that the loud lies the man had threatened to spread about the guard would have, instead, the magistrate's own written word standing flat against them. The showman would shout up and down the road, no doubt, all the way to the assizes, but he would be shouting against a paper signed by a king's magistrate and witnessed by a parish, and a lie shouted against a thing like that is just noise. He'd bet his pitch against the guard's post. He'd lost the pitch, and the guard had never been in any danger of losing the post at all, because the guard had understood from the first what the showman never would, that the loud is not the strong. The showman had spent his whole life believing that the man who shouts the longest and looms the largest wins, and he had walked into a green field in a poor valley and met, for the first time, a man who simply could not be shouted down or loomed over or frightened off, because he wanted nothing the showman could take and feared nothing the showman could do. And against a man like that, all the size and all the noise in the world is just a wave breaking on a sea wall. When it was all reckoned, and the constable had the cheat in his frame in keeping, the guard did not stay to be thanked. That was the thing about him I have turned over most often since. There was a crowd on that green by then that would have carried him on their shoulders to the next county, and the squire was working up to a speech, and he wanted none of it. He went back to his coach. I followed him partly, I'll admit, because I had not yet found the courage to say my own piece, and I caught him at the rope where the ladies' coach stood under the chestnuts in the last of the sun. The old lady herself had her window down and had been watching the whole long afternoon, and as the guard came up she said something to him I could not hear, and he answered her low, and she nodded, and that was all the praise he took from anyone that day. A few words through a coach window from the person he'd been sent to keep. I went up to him before the horses could be turned, and I told him the thing I should have told the whole green hours before, when it might have spared somebody a penny, that I had seen the break myself, near to noon, and had said nothing, because I was small and afraid and it was only money. I expected him to think less of me. He looked at me for a moment with that plain, steady face. "You saw it and you carried it all afternoon and it ate at you," he said. "That's not nothing. Most men see a wrong and have it off their conscience by supper. You couldn't put it down. That's the part you should keep." Then, after a moment, "I had a uniform and an order to ride past and a magistrate who'd take my word. You had a paper twist of nuts and a boy's hand to hold and a whole parish full of your own neighbors who'd have laughed at you. It cost you more to even think of speaking than it cost me to do the whole of it. Don't let any man tell you the loud one is the brave one. I've stood my whole career on knowing it isn't." Then he asked me a favor, and it was about the boy. He had spoken to the squire while the pennies were being counted, and arranged it. The boy was not the cheat, only the cheat's tool, and there was a decent farm wanting a strong young pair of hands and a smith in want of an apprentice, and the boy would be given his choice of an honest place in our valley rather than the road and the jail. The favor was only that I and Tom Aller and the others should see it kept, that a small place which had been robbed should be big enough to take in the robbed boy and make something better of him than the man who'd had him had. We did. The boy went to the smith, and is there yet, and rings a true bell of his own these days over an honest forge, and he has never once, that I know of, laid his hand to anything that wasn't square. The coach went on to the springs in the morning. The guard rode beside it up the high road and out of our valley, and most of Marden never learned his name, and I think that is exactly as he'd have wanted it. He left us our pennies back and a boy mended and a magistrate's paper that told the truth, and he left me something harder to spend, which I have been spending slowly all the years since. The knowledge that the quietest man on the green was the only one of us who could not be moved, and that being unmoved is not the same as being a statue. That the standing still he'd been mocked for all morning was only the part that showed, and underneath it was a man who would step off his ground for strangers and stand between them and a thief, and not take so much as a thank you for it. We did not need to be told the rest. When men ask me what a king's guard is for out here, miles from any palace, what use is a man trained to stand at a gate, I tell them about the fair. I tell them the use of him is that on one ordinary afternoon, in one ordinary valley that the great world had no reason to care about, a cheat tried to take a poor parish's last pennies and its measure of itself, and a man in a red coat who owed us nothing weighed it, and stepped over a rope and rang the bell.